Welcome to Turning the Page, a New Year's audiobook celebration. Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to a collection of tales that bid farewell to the old and embrace the dawn of new beginnings. In this collection, we've handpicked stories that reflect the spirit of reflection, resilience, and the promise of a fresh start. Whether you're counting down with friends and family or welcoming the new year in solitude, let the power of storytelling transport you to moments of introspection, hope, and the universal desire for a brighter tomorrow. Personally, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who've been supporting the channel during our first year. And to those who are new, I'd like to extend an invitation to become part of our community by subscribing to the channel, giving a like on the video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments section below. 2023 was an amazing experience starting this journey with everyone, and I know 2024 will be much better. Without further ado, get ready to immerse yourself in this New Year's themed audiobook, Turning the Page.
The Bad Little Goblin's New Year by Mary Stewart. Come, children dear, let's sit on the floor around the fire, sew and watch those golden flames dancing and leaping. You see that very gay one just springing up the chimney? I know a story about him, a New Year's story. Let's snuggle up closer and look into the fire. You see that piece of coal-black wood there at the end? There was a horrid little goblin once who was as black as that bit of wood. His clothes were all black, his round cap looked like a bit of coal, his pointed shoes were jet black, and his face was dark with dirt and an ugly, scowling expression. Altogether, he was a horrid-looking goblin, and he was just as hateful as he looked. There wasn't a single person who liked him. The birds hated him because he would wait after dark when all the baby birds were cuddled down in the nest, fast asleep. Then he would pop up from under the nest where he had been hiding and cry, "Morning time! Wake up!" And all the babies would cry, "Chirp, chirp! Daddy, bring us breakfast!" They opened their bills so wide that it took a long time to shut them and put the excited babies to sleep again. Once Blackie, that was the goblin's name, dropped a bit of twig down into a baby's open bill, and the poor bird coughed so hard that he kept the birds in the nests around awake all night. Blackie chuckled with glee and went scurrying off on another prank. While the mother bunnies were asleep, he painted the tiny white flags they wear under their tails with brown mud from the marsh. When morning time really did come, and the mother bunnies woke up and called to their children to follow them, the little bunnies couldn't see any white flags on their mother's tails to follow, and all got lost in the long grass. It took the whole day to gather them together, and still longer to get those flags clean again. Blackie jumped for joy. The mother bunnies would have liked to reach him with their sharp claws, but he was too quick for them. Then Blackie found the holes where the squirrels had hidden their nuts for the winter. It had taken months to gather them, but Blackie waited until they were out hunting again, and he carried all the nuts away and hid them in the roots of an old tree where they would never think of looking. That wasn't all. Blackie did one last thing so terrible that I don't like to tell you about it. He waited until a robin's nest was full of lovely blue eggs, and the father bird was off in search of worms. Then he made such a rustling in the next tree that the mother bird flew off to see what it was, and while she was gone, Blackie danced upon the eggs until they were all broken. That filled the timid wood creatures with fury. The birds, the rabbits, and the squirrels rushed upon the goblin and drove him before them. The birds pecked him with their beaks, and the squirrels and rabbits hopped after him with their claws outstretched. Away ran Blackie, really frightened at last, faster and faster, until he reached the darkest part of the whole forest. There he jumped into a hole in a tree, curling himself up so tightly that his round cap touched his pointed shoes, and while he trembled with fear, he heard the birds and bunnies and squirrels go tearing past, thinking that the wicked little goblin was still running ahead of them. When they had all gone, Blackie peeked out of his hole. Oh, how terribly quiet it was! Not a bird chirped, not a squirrel or a rabbit or a woodchuck lived there. It was so quiet and so dark and so lonely that Blackie began to feel quite forlorn. I would almost be polite to a tree toad, he thought, but not even a croak or a buzz or a rustle broke the stillness. The bad little goblin put his head down upon his black knees and went to sleep. There was nothing else to do. The first sound which woke him up was chop, chop. He rubbed his eyes and peeked out. He saw woodcutters cutting down trees with their sharp axes. Then he saw them coming toward the tree where he was hiding. Shaking with terror, Blackie curled himself up into a tight ball. Chop, chop, crash went the tree, and Blackie's head bumped hard against the top of his hole as, still inside it, he felt the tree fall to the ground. That was rather fun, and much excited, he peeked out of a crack and watched the men fastening chains around the trees and loading them on wheels. His own tree went too, and the next thing Blackie heard was saw, saw, as the tree was sawed into logs at a lumber yard. Again he rolled up tight, hoping the knives wouldn't cut him in two, and they didn't. He was still safe in his hole when his log was thrown with others right down into a dark cellar. It was even drearier there than in the forest, and Blackie began to long for some playfellows. I wouldn't tease them. I'd just play with them nicely, he sighed, and 2 tears ran down his little black face, washing it almost clean. Then Blackie heard a strange new sound. It was gayer than a squirrel's chatter, sweeter than a bird's song. It was a child's laughter. Where did it come from? Blackie stopped crying and listened. It came again, and the laughter of other children mingled with it. Blackie peeked out. There was no one in the cellar. He crept out and tiptoed up the stairs in search of those laughing voices. Hiding in the shadows so that no one could see him, he passed through the kitchen and on into a room full of sunshine and children. He ran in and hid behind a curtain, peeking out curiously. In the center of the room stood a little golden-haired girl, the one whose laughter he had first heard. But as Blackie watched her with delight, he saw her pucker up her face as though she were going to cry. "My dolly, my dear dolly, I can't find her," she wailed. In a flash, all the other boys and girls were searching under chairs and tables for the runaway dolly. They couldn't find her, but Blackie saw a pair of doll's feet poking out from under the sofa. He hopped swiftly across the floor, pulled the doll out by one leg, and placed her on a chair beside the little girl. "Oh, see, my doll's come back," she cried, hugging her with joy. "She went for a walk and came back again." And taking the doll's 2 hands in hers, she danced with her around the room. The other children danced too, and their laughter rang out again. "She went for a walk and came back all herself," they cried. Blackie thought he had never seen or heard anything so merry. It made him want to dance also. Poor little black goblin, whom the maid, if she had seen him, would have swept out of the room, mistaking him for a bit of coal. But Blackie took care that no one did see him, except perhaps the children. I don't know whether anyone ever saw him or not. He spent most of the time with them, and somehow they seemed to know that he was there and that he was their friend. Every evening when they had their supper, they put a bowl of milk in front of the fire for him, and when they came in to breakfast, the bowl was always empty. I don't know how Blackie drank it without being seen, for he still slept in his log in the cellar and was asleep as soon as the children's heads touched their pillows. The children's mother was puzzled over that empty bowl, but she might have guessed there was a friendly goblin in the house by the way lost things were always turning up. "I can't find my thimble," the mother would cry. "Come, children, look for it." On the floor, under the rug, in the flower pots, and on the tables hunted the children. But hiding behind the curtain, Blackie had seen a bit of something gold shining through the tassels of the sofa. Quick as a flash, he pulled it out and placed it on the arm of the mother's chair. "Why, here it is!" she exclaimed. "How did it get here?" The children laughed and winked at each other as though they understood, but how could they explain about the goblin to Mother? Their father was always looking for his spectacles. Mother, the children, and all the maids would be called in to help search. Before Blackie came, they often searched for hours, but he always found them in a twinkling, in a book, perhaps, or under the fender, and would place them right in front of Father. Gracious, look here! There must be some magic around," he would cry, and the children would jump up and down with glee. They knew all about the magic. They guessed that a little black goblin was also jumping with delight behind the curtain. One morning, it was New Year's Day, Blackie slept longer than usual. He was curled up inside his log, so sound asleep that even the joggling of his home being carried upstairs didn't waken him. Then he was turned upside down, and opening his eyes, he peeked out of the crack and found that the log was about to be thrown onto the blazing fire. Crash! It went. How very warm it was! And then Blackie heard the children laughing. He poked his head out and saw them all sitting in front of the fire, watching the blaze. All around Blackie, red and yellow flames were dancing, so gay, so golden, so happy that Blackie forgot to be frightened. "I want to be gay too," he cried. "I want to laugh with the children and dance with the flames." His log caught fire, blazed up, and out sprang Blackie, a little black goblin no longer. Instead, he was the shiniest, most dancing golden flame that you ever saw. For a few moments, he just danced up and down with delight. Then, waving and bowing to the children, he cried, "Happy New Year! Happy New Year!" and sprang up the chimney. The children's glad voices echoed after him. When he reached the top, he saw a glorious sight. The sun shining on the snow and ice turned the world into a sparkling fairyland, and the sky was as blue as forget-me-nots, or Polly's eyes, or the very bluest thing you have ever seen. Blackie danced with the sunbeams over the glittering ice until he almost ran into a flock of little birds huddled down in the snow, too gold to fly. Their feathers were ruffled and they looked very miserable. "Come play with me!" he cried, dancing around them. He was so gay and so beautiful that they forgot the cold and flew in circles around him. "Come and join us!" he cried to a group of rabbits who were hunched up upon the snow, half frozen. They hopped along slowly toward him, and then they, too, forgot the cold while they played games with the golden goblin and the birds, until they were all as merry as the sunbeams. "Happy New Year! Happy New Year!" they called to each other and to the twinkling flame goblin. Then Blackie saw some squirrels curled up on the branches of a tree, so miserable they couldn't even make-believe scamper. "What is the matter? Do you want some nuts?" he cried. "Follow me!" And away he darted to the roots of the tree, where, as a naughty little goblin, he had hidden their winter store. The squirrels followed slowly, but when they saw their treasure, their eyes sparkled, their teeth chattered with delight, and they scampered back and forth from the tree root to their own holes, their paws full of nuts. They were as gay as Blackie himself. "Happy New Year! Happy New Year!" they cried to their gleaming friend, whom they never dreamed was the bad little goblin they had chased away the autumn before. So all day and for many days, the goblin danced and sang and helped people and birds and the wood creatures. He twinkled as merrily in the sunshine, out of doors as he did when he danced in the fire, warming the children and singing them songs. "It's like Happy New Year every day when the goblin is here," cried the children, dancing as gaily on their hearth rug as the sprite was dancing within the fire. "There he is now! Do you see him? He is dancing and crackling and crying to all of us, 'Happy New Year! Happy New Year!'" The Queen of the Year by Edna Dean Proctor. When suns are low and nights are long, and winds bring wild alarms, through the darkness comes the Queen of the Year in all her peerless charms. December, fair and holly-crowned, with the Christ-child in her arms. The maiden months are a stately train, veiled in the spotless snow, or decked with the bloom of paradise, what time the roses blow, or wreathed with the vine and the yellow wheat, when the noons of harvest glow. But oh, the joy of the rolling year, the queen with peerless charms, is she who comes through the waning light to keep the world from harms. December fair and holly-crowned, with the Christ child in her arms. The New Year's Bell by Andrea Hofer Proudfoot. A ring-a-ring-a-ring! A ring-a-ring-a-ring! Brother Carl, wake up! Wake up! Don't you hear the great bell? Father is ringing the new year in. Don't you hear it, little Carl? Wake up! Tangle-haired little Carl sat up in bed, rubbed his eyes, and after a few winks, opened them wide. Is it the wind, Brother Hans, that sings so? No, no, it is the great bell. Don't you hear it ring? It is ringing for the new year. Is Father drawing the rope? Asked the little one. Of course he is, little Carl. He is waking up the whole world that everyone may wish a happy new year. Come, let us go to the window. And the two little fellows crept out of their warm nest onto the cold floor and over to the window in the gable. Oh, see, there is Father's lantern in the steeple window, cried Carl. It threw its light into the frosty night. The clear stars cut sharp holes in the sky, and the air was so cold it made everything glisten. A ring-a-ring-ring! Clanged the great bell, and little Hans and Carl knew their father's arms were making it ring. The strokes were so strong that each one made little half-asleep Carl wink, and the stars seemed to wink back to him each time. He crept closer to Hans, and the two stood still with their arms about each other. The room was quite cold, but they did not mind it, for with each stroke the great bell seemed to ring more beautifully. It seemed so near them, as if ringing right in their ears, and the two little boys stood and listened with beating hearts. I saw dear Father trim his lantern, whispered Hans. He set it near the door before we went to bed, all ready to light when the clock struck 12. Mother said to him as he put the lantern there, Ring the bell good and strong, dear Father, for who knows but this year may bring the great blessing which the Christ child promised. We must watch for it, little Carl. And the old bell seemed to speak louder and clearer to the little ones as they eagerly listened for what it was telling. Father says the bell will never ring from the old tower again, for the new one is being built, said Hans. And what do you think, Brother Carl? Our dear mother wept because the old steeple must be broken down, and the dear bell that is even now a-ringing must be put into another great tower to ring. Does the great bell know it, brother? No, dear little Carl, but no matter where it is put, it will always ring and be glad to wake the village for the new year. Will we go and say goodbye to the dear old bell, Brother Hans? Whispered little Carl. Yes, brother mine, when it is day we will go, for it has rung so many times for us. They crept out of the cold into their snug bed again, and the great strokes poured from the tower window long after the little curly heads were full of dreams. Wake up, Brother Hans! There is the sun! This time, little Carl was the first to arise. Quickly, they were both dressed, and opening their door noiselessly, they went down the narrow stairs on tiptoe, and then out into the open air. A swift wind was blowing. It swept over the bare bushes and whirled the snow into the children's faces, and filled their curly hair with flakes. But the sun was smiling down on them and said, See what a beautiful day I brought for a New Year's gift to you. And the little ones passed through the church door that was always open and into the belfry tower. They knew the way, for Father had so often taken them with him. They came to the long, dark ladder way, but they did not mind the dark, for they knew the bell was at the top, and they bravely began to climb. Hans had wooden shoes, so he left them at the foot of the ladder. It is so much easier to climb a ladder with bare feet. Besides, he hardly felt the cold. He was such a quick and lively little boy. Carl went ahead that Brother Hans might the more easily help him. They climbed up, and the brave big brother talked merrily all the time to keep little Carl from thinking of the long, long way. Up and up they went. It became darker and darker. Little Carl led on, and he was glad that Hans was behind him. All at once, a bright gleam of light greeted them from above, and they knew that soon they would be with the dear old bell. Through the opening they crept, and there the great bell hung and they stood beneath it. Hans could just touch it, and he felt its long tongue and saw the shining marks on its sides where it had struck in clanging for many, many years. It was very cold in the belfry. Little Carl tucked his hands under his blouse and gazed at the bell, while Hans explained to him what made the music and the great tolling tones that came from it. "The whole world loves the great bell, Brother Carl," said Hans. "Mother thinks that last night it rang in the great blessing which the Christ child had promised." "What did the little Christ child promise, brother?" "Don't you remember, little Carl? Mother told us that the Christ child would send little children a beautiful gift. I think it must be the new year that he has sent, for that is what the old bell brought to us last night." And Hans lifted little Carl, and he kissed the beautiful bell on its great round lip, and the bell was still warm from its long ringing. And they stood and looked at the bell quietly for a long time, and then they said, "Goodbye, dear great bell," and they went down the dark ladder again. Hans put on his wooden shoes at the foot of the ladder, and with flying feet they crossed the church garden, and there stood the dear mother in the door looking for them. She had found their little bed empty, and was just starting out to find them. "Dear mother, we have been in the tower to thank the great bell for bringing the new year," cried Hans. "Did the Christ child send it, mother?" asked little Carl. The mother stooped and put her arms about them and kissed them both. As she led them into the room, she said, "Yes, my little ones, the Christ child sends the new year."
Ring Out, Wild Bells by Alfred Tennyson. Ring out, wild bells, to the wild sky, the flying cloud, the frosty light. The year is dying in the night. Ring out, wild bells, and let him die. Ring out the old, ring in the new. Ring happy bells across the snow. The year is going, let him go. Ring out the false, ring in the true.
A Masque of the Days by Charles Lamb. The old year being dead and the new year coming of age, which he does by calendar law, as soon as the breath is out of the old gentleman's body, nothing would serve the young spark but he must give a dinner upon the occasion, to which all the days of the year were invited. The festivals, whom he deputed as his stewards, were mightily taken with the notion. They had been engaged time out of mind, they said, in providing mirth and good cheer for mortals below, and it was time they should have a taste of their own bounty. It was stiffly debated among them whether the fasts should be admitted. Some said the appearance of such lean, starved guests, with their mortified faces, would pervert the ends of the meeting. But the objection was overruled by Christmas Day, who had a design upon Ash Wednesday, as you shall hear, and a mighty desire to see how the old dominie would behave himself in his cups. Only the vigils were requested to come with their lanterns to light the gentlefolk home at night. All the days came. Covers were provided for 365 guests at the principal table, with an occasional knife and fork at the sideboard for the 29th of February. Cards of invitation had been issued. The carriers were the Hours, 12 little merry whirligig foot-pages that went all round and found out the person invited, with the exception of Easter Day, Shrove Tuesday, and a few such movables who had lately shifted their quarters. Well, they all met at last, foul days, fine days, all sorts of days, and a rare din they made of it. There was nothing but "Hail, fellow day, well met," only Lady Day seemed a little scornful. Yet some said 12th day cut her out. for she came all royal and glittering and Epiphanes. The rest came in green, some in white, but old Lent and his family were not yet out of mourning. Rainy days came in dripping, and sunshiny days laughing. Wedding day was there in marriage finery. Payday came late, and doomsday sent word he might be expected. April Fool took upon himself to marshal the guests, and May Day, with the sweetness peculiar to her, proposed the health of the host. This being said, the lordly New Year, from the upper end of the table, returned thanks. Ash Wednesday, being now called upon for a song, struck up a carol which Christmas Day had taught him. Shrovetide, Lord Mayor's Day, and April Fool next joined in a glee, in which all the days chiming in made a merry burden. All this while Valentine's Day kept courting pretty May, who sat next him, slipping amorous billets-doux under the table till the dog-days began to be jealous and to bark and rage exceedingly. At last the days called for their cloaks and greatcoats and took their leave. Shortest Day went off in a deep black fog that wrapped the little gentleman all round. 2 vigils, so watchmen are called in heaven, saw Christmas Day safe home. They had been used to the business before. Another vigil, a stout, sturdy patrol called the Eve of St. Christopher, seeing Ash Wednesday in a condition little better than he should be, e'en whipped him over on his shoulders, pick-a-pack fashion, and he went floating home, singing, "On the bat's back do I fly," and a number of old snatches besides. Longest Day set off westward in beautiful crimson and gold. The rest, some in one fashion and some in another, but Valentine and pretty May took their departure together in one of the prettiest silvery twilights a lover's day could wish to set in.
The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme, to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. The Child and the Year by Celia Thaxter. Said the child to the youthful year, "What hast thou in store for me? O giver of beautiful gifts, what cheer? What joy dost thou bring with thee? My seasons 4 shall bring their treasures, the winter's snow, the autumn's store, and the flowers of spring, and the summer's perfect rose. All these and more shall be thine, dear child, but the last and best thyself must earn by a strife divine, if thou wouldest be truly blessed."
The First New Year by George Warwick. Long ages since, when time was young, a blissful couple sat and sung in Eden's lovely fields so fair, before the tempter entered there. The rosy hours were whiled away in sweet repose or gentle play. One little darling, lovely boy, filled their hearts with boundless joy. Young Adam watched the stars at night, and saw the constellations bright. Along the grand ecliptic's face, with a great globe with lightning pace, swept onward in its annual round, till it the starting point had found. Then rose his anthem loud and clear, "O God, bless thou the opening year, To us thy children show thy face, the new year bless for all my race. Then spake the Lord, Thou son of earth, with each dead year shall come a birth. While the world doth its track pursue, the year shall be forever new. Thy race may perish, and at last the globe be into darkness cast. The glittering stars may cease to shine, but until then, thou son of mine, while this mighty globe doth roll, and light doth shine from pole to pole, my word I give, be of good cheer. I'll bless for them each glad new year.
The Legend of Good King Wenceslaus, adapted. A Legend of Mercy. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. King Wenceslas sat in his palace. He had been watching from the narrow window of the turret chamber where he was. The sunset, as its glory hung for a moment in the western clouds, and then died away over the blue hills. Calm and cold was the brightness. A freezing haze came over the face of the land. The moon brightened toward the southwest, and the leafless trees in the castle gardens and the quaint turret and spires of the castle itself threw clear, dark shadows on the unspotted snow. Still the king looked out upon the scene before him. The ground sloped down from the castle towards the forest. Here and there on the side of the hill, a few bushes, gray with moss, broke the unvaried sheet of white. And as the king turned his eye in that direction, a poor man came up to these bushes and pulled something from them. "Come hither, page," called the king. One of the servants of the palace entered in answer to the king's call. "Come, my good Otto, come stand by me. Do you see yonder poor man on the hillside? Step down to him and learn who he is, and where he dwells, and what he is doing. Bring me word at once." Otto went forth on his errand while the good king watched him go down the hill. Meanwhile, the frost grew more and more intense, and an east wind blew from the black mountains. The snow became more crisp, and the air more clear. In a few moments, the messenger was back. "Well, who is he?" "Sire," said Otto, "it is Rudolph the swineherd, he that lives down by the Brunweis. Fire he has none, nor food, and he was gathering a few sticks where he might find them, lest, as he says, all his family perish with the cold. It is a most bitter night, sire." "This should have been better looked to," said the king. "A grievous fault it is that it has not been done. But it shall be amended now. Go to the Uri, Otto, and fetch some provisions of the best." "Bring me flesh and bring me wine, bring me pine logs hither, thou and I will see him dine, when we bear them hither." "Is your majesty going forth?" asked Otto in surprise. "Yes, to the Brunweis, and you shall go with me. When you have everything ready, meet me at the wood stacks by the little chapel. Come, be speedy." "I pray you, sire, do not venture out yourself. Let some of the men-at-arms go forth. It is a freezing wind, and the place is a good league hence." "Nevertheless I go," said the king. "Go with me, if you will, Otto. If not, stay. I can carry the food myself." "God forbid, sire, that I should let you go alone. But I pray you, be persuaded." "Not in this," said King Wenceslas. "Meet me then where I said, and not a word to anyone besides." The noblemen of the court were in the palace hall, where a mighty fire went roaring up the chimney, and the shadows played and danced on the steep sides of the dark roof. Gaily they laughed, and lightly they talked, and as they threw fresh logs into the great chimney place, one said to another that so bitter a wind had never before been known in the land. But in the midst of that freezing night, the king went forth. Page and monarch forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament and the bitter weather. The king had put on no extra clothing to shelter himself from the nipping air, for he would feel with the poor that he might also feel for them. On his shoulders he bore a heap of logs for the swineherd's fire. He stepped briskly on while Otto followed with the provisions. He had imitated his master and had gone out in his common garments. On the two trudged together, over the crisp snow, across fields, by lanes where the hedge trees were heavy with their white burden, past the pool, over the stile where the rime clustered thick by the wood, and on out upon the moor where the snow lay yet more unbroken, where the wind seemed to nip one's very heart. Still King Wenceslaus went on, and still Otto followed. The king thought it but little to go forth into the frost and snow, remembering him who came into the cold night of this world of ours. He disdained not, a king, to go to the beggar, for had not the King of Kings visited slaves? He grudged not, a king, to carry logs on his shoulders, for had not the King of Kings borne heavier burdens for his sake? But at each step Otto's courage and zeal failed. He tried to hold out with a good heart. For very shame he did not wish to do less than his master. How could he turn back while the king held on his way? But when they came forth on the white, bleak moor, he cried out with a faint heart, "My liege, I cannot go on. The wind freezes my very blood. Pray you, let us return." "Seems it so much?" asked the king. "Follow me on still. Only tread in my footsteps, and you will proceed more easily." The servant knew that his master spoke not at random. He carefully looked for the footsteps of the king. He set his own feet in the print of his master's. In the master's steps he trod, where the snow lay dinted. Heat was in the very sod, which the saint had printed. And so great was the fire of love that kindled in the heart of the king, that as the servant trod in his steps, he gained life and heat. Otto felt not the wind, he heeded not the frost, for the master's footprints glowed as with holy fire, and zealously he followed the king on his errand of mercy.
As our 2023 New Year's audiobook comes to a close, we want to express our deepest gratitude for being a part of this journey into the realms of reflection, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. We hope these stories have ignited a spark within, inspiring you to embrace the possibilities that the upcoming year holds, and that the coming year be filled with love, growth, and exciting adventures. Thank you for allowing us to be part of your New Year celebration through the power of storytelling. If you've enjoyed this journey and would like to experience more from us going forward, don't forget to subscribe so you know all about our future uploads. Until next time, may you all have a very happy New Year celebration.